Well, hey everybody, it's Pastor Kelly, and hope you're having a great week. It's time for our normal, what would be our midweek Bible study. But tonight I wanted to do something very different, something I've never done before. Some of you might think this is interesting, some of you might find this extremely boring. And so that's okay. I hope it's helpful and beneficial to you for a number of reasons. What I want to do is bring you here inside my office into my library. I have a lot of books, and over the last few months, you've seen me do a lot of video recording here with these books behind me. And maybe you've wondered and asked the question, has he read all those books? And the first answer to that is no, I have not read all of these books. But I've read a lot of these books. And do I use this library? Do I use my books? And the answer to that is yes, a resounding yes. Any pastor that's worth his salt and preacher will have a library and make use of his library, and they become your best friend. But what I want to do is walk you through just some of the books that I have that I think might be beneficial and helpful to you in your walk with the Lord. You know, at Temple, our desire is to make disciples of Jesus who think, act, and live like Him. And the first primary resource to do that and to accomplish that is the Bible, is the Scriptures. And so these books do not replace the Bible. They are supplements, and they come along beside of me, and the books that you have come along beside of you and God's Word to help you grow and mature as a follower of Christ. And so understand first and foremost, if you're going to read any book, read the Bible. But there's benefit and there's wisdom in reading other books as well to help us grow as disciples of Jesus who think, act, and live like Him. So I'm standing here behind all of my books. I've got somewhere between 700 and 800 books here in my library. I've got about 3,000 books on my computer in a Bible study software program that I use. So I'm always in books and reading and researching and studying, especially as I'm preparing sermons and Bible studies. My library is laid out in a couple different sections. And so what I've done is I've gone through and I've pulled off some books off of the shelf that I think might be beneficial and helpful to you in your own spiritual journey. And so let me just kind of show you a broad picture of what we're going to do and some of the resources that I'm going to share with you. So you can be paying attention if there's something that maybe piques your interest. Over here on my right is Bibles and study Bibles. I'm going to recommend a good study Bible to you. And then we're going to talk about some biographies and some recommendations that I have there. Missions, church history, biblical history, Baptist history. I'll give you some recommendations there. Moving into leadership and team building. Maybe in your profession, you work with a team of people, you have people that you lead, some recommendations there. Some books on pastoral ministry and personal ministry. If by chance somebody watches this that's outside of Temple, you're a pastor, some recommendations there. I recommend to you a couple books on prayer and how to study the Bible. So that I'm going to talk to you about. I'm going to recommend to you a Bible commentary if you're interested in finding something to continue your studies. And then we're going to talk about some counseling resources around the issues of marriage and family. So that's how my library is laid out. And so let me walk through now and talk about some particulars with you that maybe will benefit you. Right here is my Bibles and collections of Bibles. On my computer, I use more of this on my computer program because I can put out different translations on my screen and look at them side by side. But if I could recommend to you one study Bible, and I think if you can afford to have a study Bible, you really should get one and save up for one if you're able. And a really good study Bible is the CSB Study Bible. That stands for Christian Standard Bible. A couple of things I like about this. One, the Christian Standard Bible translation was the first translation written by Southern Baptists. And so the editors who translated the Christian Standard Bible were all Southern Baptists. And so we're proud of that, being that we are Southern Baptist. But a study Bible gives you lots of notes and resources. As you can see, it's a very thick Bible. But as you're reading, if there's something you don't understand, you can look down and there's footnotes that help provide explanation to what you're reading. And so there are lots of good study Bibles. I have several here. John MacArthur has an excellent study Bible. I used that for years and years and years. Life Application is another study Bible that's been around a long time. It's excellent. But a more recent, updated, newer study Bible that I'd recommend to you is the Christian Standard Bible Study Bible. I preach out of the New American Standard, as you know, if you go to Temple here, and that's the translation that I use, and I think you can also get that maybe in that translation. Let's talk a minute here about some biographies. I've got several different up here: Billy Graham, C.S. Lewis, Martin Luther, Sergeant York, just from some history, Jonathan Edwards. But I wanted to give you two here that I'd recommend. We all love Chick-fil-A. And if you're looking for some good summer reading, something that's very casual but really interesting, it's Doing Business the Chick-fil-A Way by Truett Cathy. It's a fascinating story of how Truett Cathy started the Chick-fil-A company and his values, and it explains a lot of the why behind the what that Chick-fil-A does. And so Truett Cathy's Doing Business the Chick-fil-A Way. And then more on the biblical side, this is a book called Paul, Apostle of the Heart Set Free by F.F. Bruce. The Apostle Paul is one of the most fascinating characters in all the Bible. And this is a very technical book, but an excellent book that not only really goes in depth about the life of the Apostle Paul, but in so doing, it really gives you a span of much of the New Testament, since Paul wrote so many books of our New Testament. So Paul, the Apostle of the Heart Set Free is an excellent book if you really want to get into the life and the ministry of the Apostle Paul. Down in this section, I have books on world religion. I have a Book of Mormon, not that I'm studying it to preach, but for the purposes of knowing what other people believe. Books on other religions, Islam. And if you'd like a recommendation on studying any of those particular areas, reach out to me and I'll be happy to give you some recommendations. But really a classic book, this is a revised edition of it, around the area of missions, is a book by John Piper called Let the Nations Be Glad, The Supremacy of God in Missions. John Piper, anything by Piper is excellent. I don't agree with everything about his theology, but I agree with most things about his theology. And so Let the Nations Be Glad is an excellent book. I had some recommendations here for some books, but if you're interested in philosophy, I'll just put it that way. My undergrad was in philosophy, history of ideas. A couple things there. The City of God by Augustine. Homer's Iliad is excellent there. And if somebody has a particular interest in that, I'd be happy to give you some suggestions. Down here is church history and Baptist history. There's a book that was written last year, I think. It might have been the year before, so a fairly new book. And it's SBC FAQs, so the Frequently Asked Questions of the Southern Baptist Convention, a ready reference. Many of you in our church are new to the Southern Baptist denomination, and we are Southern Baptist Church. And there's Southern Baptist churches, there's Methodist churches, Presbyterian churches, non-denominational churches. And, for me personally, there's a reason that I am a Baptist. In particular, there's a reason I'm a Southern Baptist. And it goes back to theology. And so the SBC Frequently Asked Questions is an excellent book and resource to help you learn more about our convention, how we work together, the purposes of the convention, but its role as it relates to the local church. And so if that's something that particularly interests you, maybe you're new, as I said, to Southern Baptist life, being a part of a Southern Baptist church, that's a helpful resource. Coming over here to this section, as I said earlier, this section is a lot of books on leadership, church growth, and church health. And in particular, since church growth may not be something that interests you as much as it does me, I wanted to give you some other recommendations from this section. This book is a book by Andy Andrews called The Little Things. It's an excellent book helping us to understand how little what we might think are mundane, routine habits in our life that often we think are insignificant can actually be very significant as we relate to other people, as we serve other people, as we build relationships. And so this is a really good book by Andy Andrews. Anything by Andy Andrews is really good. John Maxwell is one of my favorite writers in the area of leadership. John Maxwell used to be a pastor, and God kind of redirected his ministry, but God has used him in a tremendous way for the kingdom. And two particular books, a lot of things that he's written are great, but two that's had a big impact on my life is this book right here, 25 Ways to Win with People. You know, as a pastor, I'm in the people business. I'm a people person, but we're all people. So it doesn't make sense, but it's true. We all are in the people business. And this book is just a great reminder. It's not very long, but it's really good about people skills and how to relate with people and how to win with people, just as the title says. And so he talks about our intentions in relationships, and you know how important names are, and why it's important to remember a person's name, and things like that. So just a book about relationships and connecting to people. And then this one here, another one by Maxwell called The Difference Maker. It's all about attitude. You know, the longer I live, the more I'm convinced that so much of our life revolves around our attitude. And attitude influences, you've maybe heard this before, attitude influences altitude. And so whether you soar in life or whether you bottom out in life, so much of that revolves around your attitude. And Maxwell does a really good job in this book, The Difference Maker, making your attitude your greatest asset. So I'm not trying to sell books to you for anybody here. I'm just recommending some resources to you from my library, things that have been beneficial to me that may benefit you as well. So that's a couple resources there. If you are watching by chance and you're in pastoral ministry, two books that have really challenged me is this book by Paul Tripp called Dangerous Calling. It's an excellent book. I think every pastor needs to read this book. Really challenged me in my own calling and following Christ. And then this book here I read more recently by Lance Witt called Replenish, Leading from a Healthy Soul. And let's just be honest, no matter what we do, whether you're a pastor, a teacher, a business owner, a construction worker, whatever you do, we all face seasons of burnout and discouragement. That's just a part of life. And the enemy's real, and he likes to attack us. And it's really easy sometimes. We just get worn down. And when we get worn down, we get worn out, we get discouraged. And this book is a really good book to help with that. And so Replenish, Leading from a Healthy Soul. Now, those are a little more focused on leadership and ministry related. So kind of let's go back to some things that may be more applicable to majority of you watching this video. All of us need to properly read and understand and interpret the Bible. We need to read the scriptures, and we need to know and understand the scriptures. There's a right way and there's a wrong way to read and interpret and apply the Bible. And this book here by Howard Hendricks, Living by the Book, The Art and Science of Reading the Bible, is probably the most popular, the best book out there. Howard Hendricks was a professor in Texas, a seminary professor, just a fantastic ministry. God used him to train so many pastors. Some of you have read this book. I know we've talked about it, but it's an excellent book to help you understand how to read the Bible, how to study the Bible, and how to interpret the Bible. So often when we read the Bible, we read something and we say, well, how does this apply to me? Well, we can't start with that question. That question's okay. We need to ask that question, but that's not the leading question. And so Howard Hendricks helps walk you through a process of accurately reading and studying and applying the scriptures. And so I would commend that book to you. Here are two books that are on prayer. One is by Andrew Murray. It's called Living a Prayerful Life. It's written in a devotional format. Andrew Murray has someone who wrote years and years ago. He was born in South Africa in the early 1800s. He wrote a lot of stuff on prayer. This is really a classic work on prayer. And he talks about how prayer is the pulse of spiritual life. And so that's an excellent book. As you can see, it's a small book on prayer, but I would recommend that to you. A more modern book, as I said, this was in the 1800s. More modern book is by Ken Hentfield called The Prayer of Jesus. Ken Hentfield walks through the Lord's Prayer, the model prayer, and gives some practical resources on how to appropriate that prayer into our life, but also into our habit and our pattern of praying. So if you're interested in learning more about prayer and strengthening your own prayer life, then I would recommend to you this book by Ken Hentfield, The Prayer of Jesus. When Hentfield wrote this, he was president of Southwestern Seminary in Texas when he wrote that. And then down here, these are kind of generalized books that maybe don't fit into a particular section. This is a book by one of my favorite preachers who's now with the Lord, Adrian Rogers, and it's a book called What Every Christian Ought to Know, Solid Grounding for Growing Faith. And this book is a series of messages that Adrian Rogers preached that was kind of transcribed and put into a book format. And it walks us through key Christian beliefs and doctrines in a very practical way. Adrian Rogers was someone who could take deep theological truths and put them on the bottom shelf for all of us to understand. And so just an excellent book there, What Every Christian Ought to Know, by Adrian Rogers. All right, let me move on over here. This is a section on theology books. If that's something that interests you, let me know. I can give you some resources. These are commentaries, particular Old Testament commentaries. And so when I'm preaching from Old Testament passages, I have more on my computer than I do here in regards to the Old Testament, but a lot of these resources here. Then over here, this is all of my New Testament commentaries. So I wanted to pull just one that I could recommend to you because I realize that not everybody can have commentaries like this in their home. And so if you say, Pastor, what is one commentary that would help me? I have my Bible, I have a study Bible, but then is there another resource that I could just really have right there to come along and help me as I'm reading the scriptures, if there's something I don't know or don't really understand, that could help provide some insight. And this would be that one book. This is called a one-volume commentary. And so it is a commentary on the whole Bible. And so this is the Believer's Bible Commentary. It was written by William MacDonald. If you look it up, it's probably going to look different. This is an older edition. But the Believer's Bible Commentary is an excellent resource, and I would encourage you to get it. It was $30 when I bought it, probably 15 years ago, and so I'm sure it's cheaper now. And then down here, this section, we're starting to wrap up. This section down here is all of my books on discipleship and the area of disciple making. And that's a big passion of mine and a calling in my life. And so I cannot speak of that without recommending one of my top books to you growing up, by Robbie Gallaty. Many of you that are members of Temple have read this. If you're in our D groups, most of you have read Growing Up, How to Be a Disciple Who Makes Disciples. So I cannot stress that book to you enough. And if you're a new believer, you definitely should read this book. Then a book to be helpful and encourage you in regards to spiritual disciplines. You know, Paul tells us in Timothy that bodily exercise profits little, but godliness profits in all things. And so we should discipline ourselves, Paul says in that passage, to discipline yourself for the purpose of godliness. And so spiritual disciplines, that's what they are. They're disciplines that we practice in our life as we pursue godliness, as we pursue holiness. And so an excellent book in that regard is a book by Richard Foster called The Celebration of Disciplines. Richard Foster walks through spiritual disciplines. And the thing I like about Foster is he walks through some disciplines that we maybe don't think of. We know that prayer is a spiritual discipline. We know that fasting is a spiritual discipline. We know that Bible reading is a spiritual discipline. But he talks about disciplines like simplicity and solitude, service. He says that worship is a spiritual discipline. But then he also talks about celebrating the disciplines in our life. And so he goes beyond and just steps out of some of what we typically think of spiritual disciplines and includes some other areas that are really helpful. And then another book here that I would recommend to you is this book called An Infinite Journey, Growing Toward Christ-Likeness by Andrew Davis. Andy Davis is actually the pastor at First Baptist Church in Durham, so not too far up the road. A brilliant thinker. He has memorized, he's memorized over 20 books of the Bible. Yes, you heard me say that right. He's memorized over 20 books of the Bible. But Andy Davis wrote this book, An Infinite Journey. It's really a book all about sanctification and growing more like Christ. It's a little longer book. It's 400 plus pages, but if you're up for the challenge, it will benefit you tremendously in your walk with Christ. And I would encourage that for you. And let me wrap this up. This section is books on counseling, parenting, marriage, counseling matters, depression, all those things. But I wanted to pull off a couple resources in the area of marriage. I don't loan my books out too often for the reason that they don't always make their way back to me. And this is the case. I wanted to recommend to you this book called Sacred Marriage. I can't hold the book up because I must have let somebody borrow it and didn't get it back. And so instead I'm holding up the DVDs of the teaching series based on the book from the author Gary Thomas. But Sacred Marriage is a classic book. It's been around a long time. But the premise of his book is that God did not design marriage to make you happy. He designed marriage to make you holy. Some books are just timeless, and Sacred Marriage is one of those books that's timeless. So I would commend that to you, and you can find videos of him teaching through that. Another classic, 5 Love Languages. People might think that we're beyond that, but it surprises me how many people have not read and haven't heard of the 5 Love Languages. Gary Chapman, local North Carolina guy. He serves on staff at Calvary Baptist Church in Winston-Salem, has been there for years and years and years. Wrote this book, I don't know how many years ago, but an excellent resource if you're married in knowing how you should speak the love language of your wife. And as Gary Chapman tells us in the book, so often some of our problems in marriage is that we think we're speaking our spouse's love language when we're not. And so we might be speaking our love language, not our spouse's. And so we have to learn what our spouse's love language is and how to speak that language. And so it's an excellent book, and I would commend that to you if you're married. If you haven't read it before, you really should. And then for all families, wrap it up with this one, a book by Ken Sande called Peacemaking for Families, a biblical guide to managing conflict in your home. How do I say this? If you got a family, you got conflict. Anytime you have people together, you have conflict. Relationships consist of sinners who sin. Even though we're saved, we're not perfect. We still fall short of the glory of God. But Ken Sande has given a really great book, practical, helpful book on how to be a peacemaker, not a peace faker. There's different types of people when it comes to conflict in relationships. Some people run away from conflict. That's wrong. Some people like to run to conflict. That's not healthy either. So what do? You need to be there in the middle. You need to be a peacemaker. And so this is an excellent book if you're facing some challenges in your home with your spouse, your children, other relationships in your life. There's maybe some conflict. I would definitely encourage and recommend this book to you. So just wanted to walk you through and kind of let you come into my life a little bit, into my ministry, into my prep time, into my library, the books that I have here. And I hope that something has resonated with you. You have maybe a little bit more time right now if you're still furloughed from work, or maybe you're going on vacation and you want to take something to read. Hopefully something sparked an interest here for you today that would encourage you and help you to continue to grow as a disciple of Jesus, to think, act, and live like him. So if you have any questions, if there's something particular you'd like a recommendation on, send me a Facebook message, call us here at the church office, shoot me an email. Be happy to reach out to you. But that's it for tonight. Very different from what we normally do on Wednesday evenings, but I hope it's helpful and beneficial to you. I look forward to seeing you this Sunday online or here in Kent in person as we kick off this new series. I'm really excited about it, called Waymaker. And we're taking the song, I don't preach songs, I preach the Bible, but we're taking the song Waymaker because the course of that song really speaks to the attributes of God. He's Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. We're going to work our way through those, seeing what the Bible has to say. And this Sunday, we're starting with that very first one, Waymaker. We're going to be in the Old Testament, the book of Daniel, chapter 3, and we're going to be studying about Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and how God was the waymaker as he brought them through the fiery furnace, and how God is the waymaker in your life. Whatever you're facing right now, he will make a way for you, just as he did for them. So, hope you'll join me this Sunday here at Temple. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you soon.